Texas, New Jersey. It's great to have all of you with us. So hello, welcome to the Stroud Water Research Center's 2021 Science Lecture Series at the intersection of art and science. My name is Scott Ensign, a research scientist and the Assistant Director at the Stroud Center. Many of you are friends of the Stroud Center and are familiar with our mission, but I'll remind everyone that the Stroud Center seeks to advance knowledge and stewardship of freshwater systems through global research, education, and watershed restoration. And art has played a role at the Stroud Center since our founding in 1967. So this year's lecture theme echoes the culture here at the Stroud Center. Well, we are grateful for all of you who support the center. And if you're new to Stroud Water Research Center, please visit our website and learn more about us. We are thrilled that all of you have joined us today, and we are so excited to host a presentation by the renowned conservation photographer and underwater photojournalist, Dr. Jennifer Adler. Jenny is joining today from Georgia, but she resides in Florida on her sailboat, Daedalus, which is her home base for pursuing a global mission of science and conservation storytelling, both on and under the ocean. Jenny got her undergraduate degree from Brown University and a Ph.D. from the University of Florida. Her work has taken her around the world on assignments from the National Geographic, the Nature Conservancy, the International Women's Media Foundation, and other prominent organizations. She shares her work around the world through workshops, teaching, and keynote lectures, including TED Talks. I first met Jenny when we were canoeing on Rainbow Springs as a part of a research mission that I was on, and Jennifer emerged from the water next to me with this massive camera array that you'll see in this photo here that I've forgotten to share with you. So she emerges out of the water with this massive array, and then I had the opportunity to paddle alongside as I watched her photograph. And I can tell you, I've never seen someone as at home in the underwater world as Jenny is. And it's because of her skills as a freediver and scuba diver that she's able to capture the beautiful images of life underwater that opens our eyes to the role of science and conservation in protecting our rivers and oceans. During Jenny's presentation, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to post questions, and we'll get to those at the end. So Jenny, we are absolutely thrilled to see the world through your eyes, so take it away.
Thank you so much, Scott. I can't believe how many years ago it was that we met on the river. I remember the hydrosphere very well. And actually, I think one of the photos of it might still be in my portfolio. So yeah, I always love discovering people doing really cool research underwater. So yeah, I'm really excited to share with you all today. I'm going to start sharing my screen right away. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, sweet. Okay, great. So let me get this started. So I've used the same photo here, but as Scott said, I am a scientist by training, and I use this background to try to communicate about science and conservation. And I live here in Florida, where there are more than 1,000 freshwater springs, and these springs are direct connections to the underlying aquifer. And this underlying aquifer also supplies drinking water to more than 90% of us here in Florida, but they are also these incredible places to cool off on a summer day. And you kind of can disconnect and explore. During my graduate research, I studied water research and communications in Florida and trying to mend the gap between Floridians and their freshwater, because it's often, you know, out of sight in the aquifer beneath our feet and kind of out of sight, out of mind. So trying to reconnect people, especially the next generation, as you can see here, to our almost always forgotten freshwater. So besides being this source of fresh water, sort of this resource, we can reframe water as something that's not just a resource for us, for humans, but as an ecosystem. And in the springs, these are incredibly important ecosystems for all sorts of things, from fish and turtles and manatees to snails, crayfish, everything, you name it. And these manatees are really fascinating. They draw a lot of tourists from all over. If you're from Florida or maybe somewhere else, you may be very familiar. But they actually lack a true blubber layer like seals and whales. So they have to come in from the ocean once it drops below 72. So the springs will be about 72 degrees year round, which reflects about the average temperature in Florida. And they just were recently, or a couple years ago, switched from downgraded in their status in terms of their protection because the population went up, but they're still quite fragile. And this year, I think there have been almost 1,000 that have died. So we still have a ways to go on protecting them there. But they are one of the more charismatic things that we do see in a lot of stories. One thing that might be a little bit less charismatic are grasses, but it's something that I've worked a lot with over the past 5 or 6 years. And these grasses have been disappearing in a lot of springs, and so this no longer exists. And I did a photo series. This was in 2016. This is the same exact place in 2017. So through storytelling, underwater storytelling, you know, it's important to show these types of pretty pictures that maybe inspire people to want to visit or protect these places. But I think, you know, photos can really reach out to people outside of the ivory tower and inspire them to engage in maybe a different way. And they can help convey this complex scientific information in a way, you know, that looking at this, scientists might say that there was a statistically significant decrease in vegetation. But when you look at this, the exact same spot, you can tell that there was a statistically significant difference, but you can feel it too. So while pretty photos can kind of inspire people, if we're going to show this, I would argue that we also have to show this, because you can't tell one part of the story without telling the other. So what you point your lens at is also really important, and it would be doing a disservice to science and to the local community as well to just point your camera at pretty things or just point it at, you know, the bad news. You kind of have to show what the reality of the situation is using photos. So basically, in a 1960 edition of Time magazine, they wrote that indeed it is the very absence of motion that gives a great photograph its unique qualities. It arrests the eye, invites reflection, and provokes emotion. And it is this very emotion that's often lacking in science. And photos and words can be very powerful when paired together, especially. And so, as I mentioned previously, a lot of the vegetation is disappearing from the springs, and you could kind of feel with emotion what it felt like to see that grass disappear. But if you look at this picture as well, there's more grass in this bucket than there is in the entire spring. And so this, of course, makes us feel something, right? Like this spring in the background and no vegetation in it, nothing left, all of the grass in this bucket. So if we don't feel and we don't feel connected to it and we don't care, then how are we going to take action and protect or care about these places? That's kind of the first step. So unfortunately, emotion and feelings tend to scare scientists. But this all wasn't always the way. So I want to talk a little bit about two famous scientists. One who has recently come back into the spotlight, Alexander von Humboldt, who was written about a lot in The Invention of Nature, and also Ernst Haeckel, who used art to communicate science. And this picture here is actually an example of a dye trace study in Florida, which is this very complicated geological research that looks at how the water moves and mixes as it flows downstream. And this happens either at sunrise or sunset, so that doesn't alarm people who are at the springs. It's rhodamine WT dye, so it's non-toxic, but it definitely, if you're paddling down the river and it's orange, it could freak people out. But by taking these pictures and showing it to people, it can really bring what is otherwise very complicated hydrological research outside of a peer-reviewed journal to the more general public. So this is the book that I just mentioned that kind of saved me midway through my PhD. I was studying the impacts of dissolved oxygen on snail grazing in the springs. The snails play this very important kind of top-down role in controlling some of the algae. As the levels of dissolved oxygen have dropped in the spring water over time, it's been something that's kind of been overlooked. It's affected the populations of grazers, such as fish and snails, and I was looking at that. And but as I kind of started to dig more into the research, I realized this major disconnect between Floridians and their freshwater in the first place. And I was getting so much engagement with my photographs and storytelling and talking and writing articles for the general public that I just was like, why is there such this big difference between science and communication, and why do I have to choose? And how can I kind of combine the two in a creative way? So thankfully, my advisor was really amazing, Dr. Tom Frazier at the University of Florida, and he helped me and allowed me to do this interdisciplinary PhD program. But this book really inspired me and helped me understand that science and communications weren't always so separate. So in the book, Andrea Wolf writes that Humboldt's graphic visualizations of scientific data was as innovative as it was simple. Instead of confusing tables, one look at his isotherm map, which you see here, revealed a new world of patterns that hug the earth in wavy belts. And then Humboldt wrote this book called Views of Nature for a general audience rather than for scientists in their ivory towers. And what I find especially interesting is this happened all in like the early mid 1800s. And the term scientist was first coined in 1834. And this was kind of the beginning of the professionalization of the sciences and kind of the hardening of the lines also between different scientific disciplines. And so that very year that they coined the term scientist, Humboldt started this book that did exactly the opposite of that. So Wolff writes that as science moved away from nature and into laboratories and universities, separating itself off into distinct disciplines, Humboldt created a work that brought together all that professional science was trying to keep apart. And I find that very inspiring. And I think it's starting to, become more common now, but it's very often seen as different disciplines. So German zoologist Ernst Haeckel is another one who made science beautiful. And I took a lot of inspiration from his story because he kind of went completely against what was expected of him by his parents. He was either studying to, I think, become a doctor, and he was just so tugged into this world of science, but also art. And he actually was the one who coined the term ecology in 1866. And Wolff writes that in his book Cosmos, Humboldt had written about the bond that united knowledge, science, poetry, and artistic feeling, but Haeckel was unsure how to apply this to his zoological work, because it's confusing to try to figure out how you can combine art and science maybe in your own process. And to capture flora and fauna, apparently Haeckel was confused and didn't know whether he should use a paintbrush or a microscope. And it turns out that he used both to do these incredible illustrations like you see here that are not only scientifically correct, but beautiful and have remained very famous over the years. And Haeckel's illustrations showed what Wolff called the narrative of nature. And it was kind of his compelling way of making evolution visible, which I think is really beautiful. So yeah, art was the tool through which Haeckel conveyed scientific knowledge. And I think, we can learn a lot from that and apply it moving forward. So for me, this kind of helped me overcome the feeling that I had quit my PhD after doing science. So a couple of years ago, National Geographic Society asked explorers, so like those of us with National Geographic grants, to see some hurdle we had overcome in our work. And I was thinking through it and I was like, wow, there are so many people with other hurdles that they've overcome in their careers that are just like so much more powerful than what I've had to overcome. But I was really kind of having this internal struggle in terms of I spent all this time doing a PhD and now I feel like I'm quitting it and I owe it to science to keep staying in science. And now I really have come to value the role that communicators can play, especially trained communicators in science that can tell the story in a way that's powerful, but also conveys it in like a truthful way that's true to the data at the same time. And I think a lot of times it's not the fault of journalists who are reporting on these science issues, because I would also be pretty terrible at reporting on politics potentially, or some other niche subject. Like, they're not trained in reporting science. So I think there's a huge need for reporters and communicators trained in science to actually be able to communicate the science in an effective way. So this is one of my science heroes, Jane Lubchenco, and I think this paper was written she wrote this first as a presidential address to AAAS in 1997. It was published in 1998 in Science. So over 20 years ago, she writes this paper that talks about a new social contract for science. And so number 2 on her new social contract is that scientists should communicate their knowledge and understanding widely in order to inform decisions of individual and institutions. So she's saying here, the president of AAAS is saying that, one of the big roles of science is to also communicate. So communication is an essential part of science, but we still maybe don't always see it that way, unfortunately. So I want to transition now and give you an example of a story and talk about some that I worked on in the springs that goes back to the vegetation that we talked about earlier, and also just talk about some examples or ways to tell powerful visual stories. So this story I worked on for 5 or 6 years. It was about the vegetation that I showed you earlier, and people do care about the grasses, and I have long-term time series pictures of the grasses over 5 or 6 years disappearing, the algae coming, and coating everything, and they're very kind of intense pictures. But I was trying to think, okay, people love manatees, and I had a lot of friends coming to visit, and they wanted to see the turtles. And I was like, okay, so turtles are really cool, but I guess that's a way to engage people. And so these turtles here are river hooters, and they're vegetarian turtles, and they live in the Santa Fe River Basin, which is actually a globally significant biodiversity spot for turtles, and there are about 14 species of native freshwater turtles that live here, and that's about the same number as in the Amazon River Basin. There might be 15 or 16 in the Amazon River Basin, but this Santa Fe River Basin is 1/2000th of the size. So basically a tiny, tiny little area with basically the same number as the Amazon River Basin, which is amazing. And most people in Florida don't realize that if you're going to look for turtles, you know, there's what, 7 species of sea turtles. If you actually want to find turtle diversity, you need to go to North Central Florida. So the story here is that the turtles rely on the grasses to eat. And so as the grasses are disappearing, they're losing their underwater salad bar is disappearing. So the story, though, is about these turtles, but it's not just about the turtles. Even if stories focus on communicating science, they're really stories about people, because the crucial part of storytelling is connection, and people want to connect with other people, right? So stories really allow us to go behind the scenes in these character-driven narratives and help build trust in science and scientists, which is really important, especially in times like the past couple years. Or, I mean, historically, there hasn't necessarily always been a huge level of trust in science. So this is Dr. Jerry Johnson, and he has been studying turtles and making science more accessible for the past probably 15 or 20 years at this point. He is amazing. He's a professor at Santa Fe College, so no part of his job description is actually research, but he started the Santa Fe Turtle Project and has been doing funding his own research basically in the Santa Fe River Basin, and involving students from the community college in his research, and also local people. So what's really amazing is he takes people who haven't engaged with science before and says, hey, come out in the field with me, help me collect this data, or help me collect turtles. And then at the end of the day, you realize that you have collected data and that you've participated in science, but he makes it accessible and fun. So a lot of these kids, or I guess not kids, a lot of these college students have been doing this with him for a long time, and taking kids who maybe didn't have an interest in science as much, or thought that they did, but then were like, wow, this is what science is, this is incredible. So this woman in particular is really amazing. Her name is Trish, and she is a former canine handler and from the Air Force, and she went back to school at Santa Fe and has been sort of an integral part of the Santa Fe Turtle Project for the past number of years. And she, in a really amazing interview for a story I did about HuffPost on the turtles, and she was just saying how important the community is to her and how much she's learned from Jerry, and how essential it's been in her kind of recovery from being in the Army for so long. When she lost that community from the Air Force, it was really hard for her. So kind of she has this really amazing bond with the turtles and other researchers. So what they do when they pull the turtles out of the water, they'll go out on these long field days and actually collect them by hand, put them into canoes like you saw in the last picture, and then they'll do a workup on them. So the girl in the middle there is inserting a pit tag, and then they put some clear nail polish over it. The other two on the outside, actually one or both of them maybe were at the springs and just decided to come help because they looked intrigued. And Jerry was like, oh, you should come help us, no problem. So he ends up finding these very dedicated and involved volunteers, maybe that are just already out at the springs. So they're already interested, but they will weigh the turtles, they will palpate them for eggs. And then with the pit tag as well, they scan them and they can tell if they've seen that turtle before, they can tell how much it's grown since last time, maybe how far it's traveled, because they do these turtle surveys all over North Central Florida. And actually recently they recorded the longest distance traveled for any freshwater turtle, because it was searching for food. And so as the grasses disappear, basically the turtles are swimming farther and farther to find food. And they also discovered in this process that springs are also nursery habitats for turtles. So they form this really critical role in the life stage of the turtle. And so if we are able to protect more of the springs and protect that habitat, then maybe we could help save the turtles, because they're so severely declining now. So at the end of the day, they release the turtles back into the river, and it's kind of an uncertain future for them. But one of the biggest and most important parts of this is once you take all these photos, right, and form this 5 to 6 year relationship with these scientists, you don't just let the computers or the photos sit on your computer, right? You have to do something with them that will have an impact. And so this here is one of the pictures of Jerry, sort of like his hero shot from one of the turtle surveys at Gilchrist Blue Springs State Park. And this was published in the Huffington Post a couple years ago about just both Jerry and the turtles, kind of. So it's telling the story of the ecological decline of the springs, but almost in not a sneaky way, but a way that is going to engage people in a way that's not just like, hey, the grasses are dying in the springs, kind of thing, because people might not care as much, unfortunately. I wanted to give another just couple quick examples of other stories that I've worked on, just with sort of an eye towards like why it's powerful to tell the story that way, or why I approach it in this way. So this is a picture of one of my favorite people that I've ever worked with, who I'm still good friends with. This is Colleen Frankie on the right. And I actually just got back from Maine, and I was up there a couple weeks ago filming a documentary that we started working on before COVID. And she is a lobster woman in Maine and has been doing that basically for her whole life. And as the Gulf of Maine waters warm, they're warming faster than almost any other body of water on the planet, or any other ocean body on the planet. And she started actually kelp farming, which is this booming industry. If you look it up, it's just, there's so many articles about it now. And it's good for the environment. It's no input, doesn't have any negative benefits as far as science can tell so far. And it grows on these lines, basically about 7 feet below the surface and on buoys. And she hugely scaled up her farm this year when I was up there. I mean, it's massive, many, many acres with hundreds and hundreds of buoys in it. And it's opposite the lobster season. So it doesn't get in the way of like lobster boats or anything like that, because she can do both. And so the story overall is really about the changing Gulf of Maine, and switching from relying fully on lobsters, which are also declining as the water warms, to relying on something like kelp, this new crop. But it's also a story about Colleen, and her amazing story is that she has struggled with addiction during her life, and she has been sober for several years now. And when she was going through her process of recovery, she thought how amazing it would be to create a kelp farm where other women in recovery could kind of learn and grow with her as the kelp grows. And so she hires women who are in recovery to help run the kelp farm, and of course pays them for their time, and creates this community of people who have been through a lot of the same things, to be able to support each other, which I think is really, really amazing. The documentary should be out probably sometime next year or the year after. This is Nasiri, one of the first 2 sponge farmers in Zanzibar, and this is the last story that I worked on before COVID shut everything down. I was actually flying back from Zanzibar in February of last year, and I got a call. Of course, my mom is texting me from Massachusetts being like, there's some weird virus happening, in all the international airports. And I was like, it's fine. She didn't want me to go anyways in the first place, thought that it was dangerous, all these things. And I was like, Mom, you worry about everything. And of course we come back, and a couple weeks later, the pandemic happens and the whole country gets shut down for however long it's been shut down for. But this was an incredible example. So my best friend lived in Zanzibar, and I wanted to go visit her. And I thought, wow, I wonder what types of interesting marine conservation stories are happening there. And I found out that there was sponge farming. And so actually in Zanzibar, where the waters are warming very quickly, a lot of the women were historically seaweed farmers on a smaller scale, not the kelp like Colleen's growing, but the smaller scale, like kind of in the shallow water. But a lot of it is starting to die. So basically they started sponge farming. And so it's a story about how we can farm sponges in Zanzibar sustainably, because you only have to take a small piece of the sponge and then you put it in a sponge nursery. So kind of like if you've heard of a coral nursery, same concept, sponge nurseries in the deeper water. They cut pieces of those sponges off and then grow them out in their farms in the shallow water. And so it's a story about finding a new sustainable product that these women can grow. They all own their own companies, which is incredible for women on a traditionally more Muslim island where they wouldn't work outside the home, and especially not out in the water. And it's a story about the sustainable product but it's mostly about these incredible women. So there are now 11 of them that each own their own business and make way more money. I think it was like something like 30 times the amount of money that they can make being a seaweed farmer, because they are the direct owners. They don't have to sell it to some third party, company who controls the price and everything. So they'll sell these sponges, and then they're making an amazing living. And the ones I interviewed were so happy and really glad that they were doing it. So it's a story about the people again, but the people are a way to tell the story about ecosystems and about science. So I just want to end by saying that, coming into this as a scientist, a lot of my dissertation was trying to look at impact and how we can measure impact, specifically for an environmental education program, looking at students and whether or not their attitudes changed before and after a program that I created to bring them to the springs and give them cameras and have them experience that. And I think we can measure impact in different ways, and it's in a lot of different ways, and it's evolving, and it's a pretty popular field now. But I think that inspiring the next generation is one of the biggest and most lasting impacts we can have. And a lot of times it's hard to measure that, right? Like whether or not a kid was inspired. And you can get down to which types of metrics you can measure for attitude or behavior or whether or not they were inspired. But this picture actually came to me. I was far away in like a remote Tahitian atoll working on assisting a photographer on a Nat Geo assignment in 2018. And it was Halloween. None of us really remembered that it was Halloween. And this woman that I don't know messaged me this picture of her daughter, and she was dressed up as me for Halloween. And I was getting teary. I was like, there was like the biggest honor I feel like that I'd ever had to have this other young girl see herself as a photographer when she grows up, because as I showed you before, I don't think I always could even see myself as that, even once I was doing it, because it didn't seem like a job that was real or a job that you could actually have and make work. And so to have another young girl see herself in that role and be inspired by someone, there aren't as many like female underwater photographers that work professionally. It was just really, really amazing. And so if there are any young people out there listening or people with kids, it's kind of, don't let people tell you that you can't, because you somehow can. Yeah, sure, you'll be writing a lot of grants and you'll never be rich, but you'll get to see some really cool places in the world and tell some stories about really incredible people who are doing work that might not otherwise ever leave the pages of a peer-reviewed journal. So scientists and scientific knowledge alone, as we know and have seen during this presentation, cannot create the resources and infrastructure needed to instigate societal change. And we have known this since this article was written in 2010. We have known this since James Lubchenco wrote the piece in 1997, or her address to AAAS. And we have known this also since Alexander von Humboldt so powerfully combined science, art, and communication and writing in the 1800s. So now I will say that I think it's time for us to get to work. So you can feel free to reach out to me in any of these ways, and I'm happy to take questions now as well.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It is so awesome to see those pictures. And I mean, one of the most special places, I don't know, seems like the Florida Springs. It's a magical freshwater environment that's awesome to see through your eyes and to see the people that you have talked to and interacted with and hear their stories through your eyes is fantastic. So thanks so much for sharing all that. And so we've got some questions coming into the chat, but I'm going to take the opportunity to slip in mine first. And so as a scientist, and I know that we have many people that are with us today who are either scientists or support science or are naturalists. And so I wondered if you could share what your advice would be to scientists, naturalists who are eager to try to make this transition from just telling data stories to telling stories with people that have that kind of impact. What would be your first advice on how we get started and get better at that as scientists?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel like one of the biggest hurdles for me and for a lot of people is also like funding and how our job descriptions are written, right? So you get a job as a professor and you need to publish a lot and you need to teach and you need to do X, Y, and Z other things. But communication, I think, often gets pushed to the side or, doesn't get focused on as much. And I think if our universities and, other organizations like you guys are obviously focusing a lot here on art and science, which is amazing. But I think if more places were to do that, it would make it almost easier for people in positions of like being a data scientist to be able to devote time to that, right? So it's like, instead of being a side thing that you're apparently supposed to do in all of your extra time, it could be something that was, more valued by the institutions that employ us. But I think in terms of if you have the time and space to do it, I mean, data stuff is really hard, right? So I guess I'll just say that like sometimes for me, I even struggle to figure out, okay, this is really complex. How can I turn my science brain off and communicate this in a way that's actually going to be understandable to the public? Because, even writing scientific articles or writing articles for the public, I was writing one for Huffington Post and I wrote rhizome, and they tried to replace it with like 7 different words that described what a rhizome was. And I was like, okay, or you could just write rhizome because that's what it means, right? So I think it is really hard. But I think there's some really powerful stuff, especially in terms of the data visualizations, like outside of photography, doing stuff like, I don't know if infographic is the right word, but like stuff like I showed with Humboldt and doing those. I think the New York Times has done a lot of really cool graphic visualizations of data. Like ArcGIS, you can do the thing where, you animate it and kind of can see maybe bird populations moving and how the patterns that they make. And so I think it's going to take a lot of us, from photographers and writers to like really creative people with like, other digital skills that I don't have. And so I think like if you're a data person, you're probably already really good at some of those programs and could become really good at communicating it through like other ways that I'm not even going to think of.
Yeah, I really like the part of what you said about the collaboration that really is required between communicators and scientists. And I think that is really a rich area that we're all eager to explore. So kind of along the same lines, building off what your answer there, Steve has a question about how you measure the excellence of your work, but what are ways that you can measure the impact of that storytelling on what you want to affect?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. And it's really hard because, you can post a photo on Instagram, right, and get a certain number of likes or a certain number, a certain amount of engagement. But what does that mean? How willing are people to change their behavior because of that? And understand, like, so do people react more? How do they react to positive versus negative images? And actually, we don't know a lot about this, honestly. One of my friends is doing her dissertation right now. I actually just saw her yesterday in Gainesville, and she's studying the impact of images on conservation behaviors. And she just had an exhibit up at the Museum of Natural History in Gainesville, and she's still like kind of tabulating data, but I think preliminarily she thinks that people will react more, at least at that museum, to negative images because they're more likely to engage with it and say like, okay, that's a pretty picture of a sea turtle, but I don't really care. Because I've seen a million of those, but that sea turtle's in a net. Now I want to go over and read the caption and see why. But she's trying to understand that, because I think as a photographer, I originally would go to so many of these presentations that I would see on like powerful storytelling and impactful work and all this stuff. And as a scientist, right, I was like, how do you know that was impactful? Like, did it, like, of course you can never tie it to like, oh, this photo directly caused that to happen. But I watched a presentation the other day, and a girl who was a lawyer said that the photo of the boy in the life jacket who was a refugee caused, like, all of a sudden, like the next year there was a huge flood of people who wanted to do refugee law. And you don't know if that's like straight up because of that picture or because, there was just a lot of coverage of it or what was going on in the world. But that photo was probably viewed billions of times. I don't know. I guess if you look back in history too, you can see like Ansel Adams and other people who made nature more available, especially from the west to the east. They say that some of that influenced legislation to protect Yosemite. But I would say currently a really good example of someone who's doing exactly that, is having a huge impact, is Carlton Ward. And he's another photographer in Florida who has also done a lot of work with National Geographic. He just had a story come out about panthers in Florida and how we can use them to kind of help protect wildlife corridors. And I think what makes his work so compelling and makes it like measurable with an impact is that he has an entire team, including an impact producer. And so she is able to take his work and take the photos and the conservation science that's being done, combine it and bring it to Tallahassee and be like, here's what's happening. So it's really, again, like, I don't mean to just keep talking about this, but about collaboration and working with people with other skills than you. So sure, I can take the picture and write an article and see how many clicks it gets. But if I want to really protect those turtles or the water, we need to take that and work with, like, partner with conservation organizations to actually have an impact. And you could track donations, you could track, you could do a survey and track attitudes and stuff, but I think generally it's hard to look and see what the impact is. But if you put a lot of work into it, you can measure impact and have impact from those pieces, but combined, not just the photos,
Right. I think one of the key things that you mentioned in there was eliciting from people, from the public, from all of us, why. The question why. And you can do that so powerfully in an image, and it's so automatic for people. We are curious people, we're curious beings. And so eliciting that question in our brain of why is that turtle in a net? Why is this situation occurring is the hook that grabs us.
I feel like as a photojournalist, I've struggled a lot too, like thinking through of the ethics of it. And I just listened to they were listening like a discussion about this the other day through Nat Geo, and it was interesting because I think, especially maybe it's a scientific background or just if you have a conscience, every time you go into a story, you're putting someone else's life out there in images, and they're trusting you incredibly to tell their story. And so you want to think like, what's my goal with this? Like, what's the end product? Am I doing it to make myself look better and make really good pictures, or am I doing it because I want to direct more people to buy these sponges, and I want to create a community fund where, you know, people can donate to help them, or I want people to see what they're doing, or you know what I mean? It's not just doing the story for yourself and for your own ego. It's making sure you're doing it for a reason.
Right, right. So I'm going to give you a question from Nicole, and I think this is something that is probably on many of our minds, but what's the most meaningful part of the work that you do to you? I mean, there are so many facets of what you've showed us that from the outside look just amazing and very fulfilling, but from your own perspective, what could you single out one part of that it means the most to you?
Yeah, I think it's just getting to witness so many people who are so passionate about what they do and so smart, and getting to help tell their stories. And it truly is, that's their stories, and trying to help them tell, you know, share it in a way that's compelling. And I think like the most interesting or humbling part of it to me is whenever you meet someone and you're kind of documenting, they're always like, for the first little bit, they're kind of like, I don't really get why you're taking pictures of me, or no one really sees the novelty and the kind of like amazingness, for lack of a better word, of like what they're doing in the everyday life. And so I think we can all get really bored with what we're doing, and I feel just like very privileged to be able to and like I felt like I was going to become the Snail Lady if I studied snails for my PhD, which of course like maybe wouldn't have happened, but just to be able to still experience and be immersed in so much of this science, and also get to know people who are doing it, who are just really smart but also like very humble people all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so here's another one. Given that you're a National Geographic explorer, you've been around the world, what's the most amazing underwater place that you've been, or the most meaningful underwater place that you've been?
The springs, for sure. Florida
Yeah.
Springs. Right here. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I haven't been diving in Indonesia and stuff, and I would love to go there. I'd love to go to the Great Barrier Reef. There are places that I would love to dive, but I still remember the first time I immersed myself in a freshwater spring, and it was in 2011. I'd driven from Massachusetts to Florida to work as a biologist at USGS, actually. And I was so miserable in the middle of Florida. It was so hot. It was August, and I jumped in the spring, and I felt like I was flying. I mean, it's if you haven't been in one, like there's no way to describe how clear the water is, really. I mean, I guess you can kind of try to see in the pictures, but especially when you're cave diving and stuff, you just feel like an astronaut because you're just floating, and I don't think I've ever felt that anywhere else.
Yeah, I agree. It's a
Yeah,
magical place. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So here's another one, and you touched on this earlier with technology and digital communications, social media, stuff like that. But do you see a technology that hasn't quite come into fruition yet in terms of science storytelling that you think is on the horizon, that is going to be a more important tool in the future than it is now?
Yeah, so one thing I've been working a lot with, so my first Nat Geo grant was a 360 virtual tour of the Florida aquifer. And when I did that, I wanted it to be a 360 video. It was kind of how I originally envisioned it. But the 360 cameras at the time did not do well in low light. And so I ended up doing a virtual tour, like kind of think Google Street View, but in underwater caves. So it's not continuous video. You come up and you press the button, you kind of move to the next to the next scene, and then it's a 360 image there. Because the reason why I did that was because I would light each individual picture with up to 11 lights, and then there's like 5 or 6 pictures together. So if you add up the number of lights that are actually in the whole sphere, there's like, they've used more than 50 lights to light the whole thing. So if you have a 360 video, of course you have to do that simultaneously, and there just wasn't really a good or effective or way to do that. And I think the 360 immersive technology has grown a lot, because that was in 2016. So since then it's come up, and I think it's giving people the ability. I don't think that you should make 360 VR of everything or use it as a substitute for going out in nature, but I think especially during the pandemic, it has been really important for people to kind of show people places maybe that they wouldn't otherwise get to go. Like, you're probably not going to get to go to Borneo and like hang out in the jungle, and you're probably not going to get to go cave diving, because most people won't, right? And so I think it's a powerful tool to bring people to places where they couldn't otherwise go or experience something else. And as the technology, especially for underwater, it's very on the edge right now. I'm actually trying out the 360 GoPro Max in a bubble housing for a project I'm working on with AAAS and Nat Geo at the moment. And I jumped in the pool with it the other day and the stitch didn't work still. And it's like, I think it will work once I render it on the computer, but it's like still at this edge where you're like, you want it to be better, but it's not quite there yet. So hopefully it will work.
Yeah, I have to say that one of the problems of that 360 video is that it's very disorienting. I've always had, difficulty like trying to figure out how that wraps around. You conceptualize that.
It can be a little weird. Yeah. So I think the collaboration though is another thing that like maybe we're not doing as good right now. And I talked about that before, but like if you can work with other people that have skill sets that you don't have, I think the way that our media environment set up right now is very geared towards like one photographer does this. You can't work with other photographers. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of a very separate kind of ecosystem where each person wants to do their own thing, but if we all work together more, it would be better.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, that's we're approaching our time today. So I want to thank you, Jennifer, for sharing these the awesome images and the stories with us and your insight here in the Q&A. It was really fun to chat with you. Your skills and your storytelling are an inspiration for all of us to value, study, and protect fresh water here and around the world. I'm so thankful for your art and your skill and for what you've shared with us today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Scott, and Jess too. Thank you for having me and for everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So thanks to all of you out there for joining us today. And remember that you can connect with the Stroud Center on our website and through social media and the links here. And of course, we welcome your support that helps us pursue our mission. And there's a lot more to come in this year's Intersection of Art and Science lecture series. And we have numerous events on the calendar that we invite you to join us for. So please check out our website for details and updates. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for your support and have a great summer, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.